I feel like one of the reasons you thought these episodes were going to be boring is because there's a lot of LDS lore going on in here. So, my time to shine. I will tell you all about it.
Uh-huh.
Mormon culture adjacent stuff going on with substances such as soda and ketamine,
Ketamine
um,
and
etc. Laughing gas.
baby blessing,
Yeah.
garments came up, like lots of
Baby blessing, drinking in the hot tub. What was the other thing you said?
garments. They talk about garments.
Garments.
Yeah.
Yes. Got a lot to
Uh-huh.
say about garments.
So should we get the church culture stuff out of the way first? Should we start there?
Let's do it.
I have so much to share.
I'm excited to hear. I am.
So I guess the first thing that shows up, well, I don't know. Are there any things that you found that stood out? Because I said in our first episode that I couldn't figure out when I first watched this who this show was marketed to, because
Uh-huh.
they casually mention things that I would think are associated primarily with Mormon culture, but then they don't go on to explain them. But it isn't the type of show that somebody who's very familiar with Mormon culture I would expect to watch.
Right.
So just wondering how it was for you.
So I know a little bit about Mormon culture. I'm going to say I think the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, they do a better job at explaining some things that are, you know, typical or practices or beliefs within the Mormon church, and they do it a little bit better, assuming that no one knows anything. And this show, I feel, yeah, they don't do. So I had some knowledge because I am a Real Housewives of Salt Lake City fan. I think that the topics are interesting. So I'm trying to think with episode 3, I don't know that I had any major questions. I mean, I did, garments, that's something that I've not known very much about other than
Mm.
the bare minimum from, again, what they share in Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. But they don't share a ton about what that means or the background or the history. So I would say that's one. But more or less, I think I'm fascinated by some of the, I don't want to say rules, but like what's a better word?
Yeah, I mean whether the rules of the religion or the rules of the culture, the norms.
The rules, the norms. The some of the contradictions or loopholes, and I'm really fascinated in that when it comes to either like caffeine use, substance use. uh
Yes.
yes.
And I don't want this to be boring, so please fast forward if you find all of the rules too boring to
Uh-huh.
hear. But I do think what stands out to me, or to me, what was like the first thing is when they talked about this guy who owns soda something, this
Swig.
thirst. Oh,
Oh, first.
swig. I
Is
don't know.
it thirst or swig?
I've
Look
written
it up. While you're
thirst.
talking, I'm gonna look it up. You might be right. I'm gonna look
But
it up.
anyway, and maybe there's both. So these franchises of selling soda, um, as if it's a coffee shop or a bar or something sort of like equivalent, right? Like people just picking up their soda. And I will say that these things popularized after I left the state, so I sort of never was engaged in that. Although I do have memories of when I was very young of somebody who came from Hawaii saying, "What's up with everybody in their big gulp mugs or whatever it was?" And it was really like this local cultural phenomenon that everybody had these gigantic 44 ounce, 64 ounce, I don't know, like mugs that you'd go to gas stations and get them refilled. So that could be anywhere, but that's a memory from childhood.
We are both right. There is a place called Thirst in Salt Lake City and Swig. So
Fantastic. So I think Thirst showed up here. Maybe Swig was featured on Desperate Housewives of Salt Lake City or whatever that show's
no,
called.
I think Swig is also on the show because I think that
Oh,
the parties they had a like almost like a bartender come. It was this episode.
hmm.
I'm pretty sure that the guy who bartended the sodas was from Swig. But
Right. They were like, this is the owner or whatever. Of course, they're rubbing elbows with the owner of Swig.
deal, big deal.
So this is funny because a lot of people will wonder about what are the dietary rules or the substance restrictions or whatever that Mormons have in place. And it's interesting. You can look this up in Doctrine and Covenants, section 89. It's got the whole thing right there. But what's funny is what's written in that, what's kind of considered to be scripture, is an idea about health. And so it says things like eat meat sparingly, which everyone 100% ignores, and just nobody's talking about meat at church, right? And having less of it. Nobody's saying that. That will not. In fact,
That
if
will,
somebody implies that you should be eating less meat, you will watch people really prickle and get defensive, because even though it's like written there in the scripture, we don't care about that.
yes,
And it's
no.
going to be, I dare you, go in, go into an LDS church and ask them if they're not eating meat and why.
Uh-huh.
Don't do that. That's mean, right? You're trolling somebody in their place of worship. So the other one is, it says no strong drinks, but it also really explicitly says unless like you brewed it yourself or picked the vine or like what. So there's something that kind of implies like some beers or wines might actually be excluded.
If you
But
make
if you make it yourself, maybe I can't remember the wording, because
it.
even though it's there, that's also ignored. And the rule is don't have any. And I'm not a historian, so I can't tell you the full thing, but I have heard historians sort of talk about how following Prohibition and around the time when conservative America was sort of moving away from alcohol, or Christian America was moving away from alcohol, this is one of the things that the Mormon Church did, perhaps to like ingratiate itself or align itself with more mainstream folks, because up until then they were the weird sort of polygamous cult. That was one of the things that they did to align, where it became, instead of a word of wisdom, like a commandment. So it's very complicated, because to a modern day Mormon, the word of wisdom means no coffee, no black tea or green tea or white tea, no caffeinated tea. You can drink herbal teas, but you can drink soda and you can drink energy drinks, because even though that distinction in tea is made, it never really is like no caffeine. It's no hot drinks, which they say is coffee and tea. But you can have hot chocolate. So like the interpretation, you can.
Okay.
So it's sort of, the original thing was no hot drinks, no strong drinks. The translation of that culturally was no alcohol, no drugs, of course, and then no tea or coffee, no tobacco, so no smoking. And so kind of like all the things that you would think of as substances were just like blanket included, but you can drink soda. And I have also heard that like BYU does not serve caffeinated sodas on campus, but drinking caffeinated soda will not keep you out of the temple, for example. And I think I talked about like temple worthiness. So you have to obey the word of wisdom if you want to be a full participating member, if you want to get married in the temple, if you want to go to the temple, all of those things. You can drink caffeinated sodas for that. Some members of the church will not allow themselves a caffeinated soda, but most members of the church think that those people are way too zealous, and nobody's drinking coffee or tea.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very fascinating to me.
So the fact that these soda shops popped up, I think fully as an anthropologist, it's like, oh, interesting. You see people who just like want to do a thing, even if, under this context, they can't do it the regular way. And I find that fascinating. As kind of an insider, I find it a little silly, because soda's not healthy. like it's bad for you.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is.
And when Layla's like, I have my 44-ounce 6 out of the 7 days a week, and the seventh day is Sunday that she's not having it, I'm like, wow.
Yeah, she makes a comment. She's like, I probably will die early. Yeah, but I love it. And yeah, I think the caffeine, like the rules when you can have caffeine or when it's acceptable, when it's accepted versus other forms that are unacceptable. Like, do you think people within the church question like that? Like, why are we able to do this, drink caffeine in this form, but not the other form?
Certainly plenty of people will point out that sort of muddled hypocrisy or whatever. But it's interesting because it often goes in different directions. So people like to call out the hypocrisy when they, like I maybe just did, which is like, this one's against the rules and this one's not against the rules. And like, what's the difference? Other people who veer more toward even more conservative, I guess, in terms of like what they will drink, they will call out the hypocrisy as if to say, even though it's not a rule, you should like understand the spirit of the law and also abstain from these other things. Which I can appreciate, because to me, I'm like, if you are downing if you're like, I couldn't possibly have coffee, but you're slamming Red Bulls, I might sort of say, like, whatever you're using to draw the line seems strange to me, right? Like, sort of feels like you're not getting the gist of what's going on here.
Yeah. Can we talk for a moment about the graduation party that Jen throws
Yeah.
husband Zach? Because Jesse and her husband Jordan, they're drinking alcohol. So like we're talking about, yeah. And they're all in the hot tub, and Jen is upset and feels that it's very disrespectful to drink alcohol there, while they have family over and other friends. But I'm gonna say, observing that, it looked like a lot of people were sort of uncomfortable by it. Did you feel like that, or was it? I mean, Jen definitely voices it, but I felt like everyone was like,
I think probably, I mean, yeah, in the context of looking at it culturally, it might just seem like, so they're drinking alcohol and that's no big deal or whatever. But like the broader context of like, if you go to somebody's grandparents' house and you like light up a bowl of weed in the basement and they're like, hey, that's not cool. Like, I would agree, right? Like, I do think there's something about respect. Like, where are you? Who's there? How does it impact the people who have invited you there, right? It's not even their home.
yeah.
So I do think people were uncomfortable, but I can't tell if it was like, ooh, I'm uncomfortable because you're drinking, or it's like, I'm uncomfortable because you're kind of being like a crappy guest,
Yeah, I think it's
or a
that.
mix. Yeah. I mean,
I
I
think it's
think being
that.
the crappy guest is the bigger complaint.
I do too. Because at Layla's divorce party, some of the people are drinking alcohol. Or I mean, I think Jessie that's her name, yeah. And they don't seem bothered by, I think they pointed out, but they don't seem bothered by it. But I think it's because of the setting, like in the context where they have family there, but there did seem to be like, oh, okay, you're doing that. All right. And I
Yeah.
also agree. I mean, different cultures have, you know, different practices that are done as a sign of respect, and like, even maybe agreeing, if you were in some cultures to not try the food, that could be considered disrespectful.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think that like culturally, like you want to try to like respect where you can. And it did feel kind of cringy a little bit.
Well, it is. If you are going to a party hosted by a vegan and they're like, no meat in my house, come to this party, it's a vegan party. And if you just feel like you have to sneak in like a chicken drumstick to eat,
Yes.
I think you're the problem. Like you can think that that's a silly rule, but like then don't be friends with this person. Don't go to the party. You can't not drink for one night. You can't not have your chicken leg for one night. I mean, this might not be exclusive to Mormons, but I do think there's something in there when some of them sort of feel like I'm not keeping these rules anymore. And the rules have always been the thing, but
Mhm.
they maybe haven't sort of like been exposed to the tact of certain things, or I don't know, sort of like the appropriateness of when you do that or when you don't do that.
I could be wrong, but out of all of the women that are on the show, Jessie is the one that has shared the least about her participation in the
Yeah.
LDS church, and her, like, the impact that it has had on her, or decisions, or honestly like her background in general. I feel like, other than the fact that she is like part owner of a salon business and hair care business, they don't really share much. She's part of the sinner group, which this comes up
Sure.
in this episode, this versus the sinner. She's part of the sinner group. She should know this, but yeah, she seems to be more removed from the church compared to the others. And I don't know.
Right. Maybe she feels like it's not a big deal, and maybe she's had a drink around these friends, and so the idea of sneaking some alcohol, but with these people didn't register as how it was going to be so bad. I get that. They also did say, and Zach says early in the episode, so Zach is Jen Affleck's husband. He's sort of like, I hope your friends behave themselves. So like whatever dynamic is already going on, it sounds like he is right, right? Like he's sort of like, I
Yes.
can't trust your friends to totally behave themselves in a way that, whatever. And we can talk about whether or not we care what Zach thinks. But Sounds like that was part of what was making everyone uncomfortable, is how that would impact Zach, parents, Jen, all of those things. And so it was cringy.
And then if we were just to kind of continue along this theme of like substances, the Botox and the laughing gas we have to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So is laughing gas necessary for Botox? I wasn't aware of that being coupled with that.
It's not.
Okay.
I'm under the impression, compared to other cosmetic procedures, that Botox is generally not super painful.
Doesn't require a sedative or a serum.
Offer that. What I thought was interesting was when I went and watched it back, they said you can, use the laughing gas, no additional charge. And I thought, the first thing I thought was, do they just roll that into the price of the Botox? Because that's not typical. And also, I thought the irony of giving someone laughing gas for Botox, like you don't want to be moving your face much.
I want to see where those lines are.
So yeah, it just seemed like that's the. So, and then Michaela said, so she had it, and then she was laughing a lot. And one of the girls, I don't remember which one, asked her, "Have you ever been high before?" And she said no, which made me think she's never used laughing gas before. Like this was her first time, and she said, "I'm gonna do it on TV." I'm like, "You go, girl."
Just like Whitney and Connor having their first champagne on TV. They're all just look at how Hollywood seduces so quickly. Yes. Where are your values?
Where? Yes, exactly. But yeah, I thought it was unnecessary, the laughing gas part. But
I mean, listen, I have to be honest. If somebody was like, "Hey, we're gonna go golfing. Do you want some laughing gas while we golf?" I'd be like, "Yeah." Like I would. I would be down for laughing gas coupled with any activity, probably if somebody introduced it. So what I find funny about this is not, or what I find, I don't know, I guess the thing that I'd criticize about this is not that they use laughing gas even for this, but it feels very clear that it is a chance for them to get away with something that's not allowed. Mm-hmm. And whatever, that's fine. But ultimately, at the end of the day, wouldn't it be better to just be like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm not going to do. Like the way I measure this is, I don't know, built by reason.
Yeah. So they do point out we don't use drugs, other substances. But, so like, I forgot the phrasing, but something along the lines, my understanding or takeaway was that they were saying, but this is a time where we can and we will sort of deal. Not like I need to do this because of the pain. That was
right.
The message.
It's and so necessary.
It's just fun. It's fun to do. They're having a good time. They're laughing. Yeah. They've all had children. Like even if you have an epidural, like I think that's it's quite painful, and still like at least leading up prior if you do have an epidural. And so I just don't think that they really need the laughing gas for the pain, but I do think that they're doing it because they can and it's fun. But then I think if you are acknowledging that, then would that not naturally turn into questioning your general practices with caffeine and alcohol? Because if I don't really need this and I'm doing this because I enjoy it and it's fun, but I only can do it because it's under the guise of medical care, then maybe I should start questioning my other practices. But they're not doing that. At least I'm not seeing that here.
Yeah, those are fair points. It is interesting. I mean, I think ultimately most LDS people they're obeying a commandment that they believe is from God. And so even if they can kind of see these incongruence, God is mysterious anyway, right? So like you can always find the devil's advocate if you want to talk about those. So I think that's probably part of it, where they're just like, it's the rule. I'm just going to do it. It's safe. I think very sincere LDS people do genuinely think that the guidance and direction that the prophet gets and gives is pretty direct from God. And so I think that's just safety in terms of like, what's the rule? I'll follow the rule. If I show up after this life, I can say I followed the rule, like that's more what they're worried about is like, did I follow the rule? I don't know. I don't know if an LDS person listening to that would feel that that's true or appreciate that sentiment, but I think some behaviors sort of demonstrate that in a way for some folks.
I don't remember if we talked about this in a prior episode, but not to keep talking about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City.
Which is
But
one of the best reality TV shows on television, I'm told.
my favorite, love it, love it. One of the housewives, she says something like about moderation. They go to a casino
Hmm.
and she does a little bit of gambling. And I think one of the producers probably asked her, like, is that okay for you to do? And she was like, in moderation. Yeah, it's okay to
Hmm.
do this in moderation. And I think in general, that's also a really healthy thought. Like anything
Sure.
can be excessive, too much sugar, like that. Yeah, it can be, but I don't want to go without sugar, but like too much can be a problem. And all of the same with caffeine, alcohol, everything.
Right.
And so,
Even though sugar maybe isn't good for you at all. I mean, maybe it is, I don't know. But like even if it's not good for you at all, you want a little. And life is about, having a little of the good things.
well, and it's the restriction, it's the rule of I can't have any or I shouldn't have any. That then
Hmm.
off, like I know we did talk about this, creates this dynamic, this typically like an unhealthy relationship with some of this because now we really want it versus, I like will tell my patients, I give this example a lot. If I said like your homework assignment, eat as much ice cream as you want every single day. Like there's no consequences like in terms of health or anything else. Like you can just do whatever, eat as much as you want. At some point they're not going to care about it anymore. And then they'll be like, I can have ice cream or I can have an apple. Some days they might be like, well, I can have ice cream anytime. There are no consequences. I'm going to go for the apple. It like allows you to sort of like learn more about what your body is actually craving, what you want. But when you have these rules, I can't have it, you tend to want it more. And so I think when it's off limits, but part of me is like when they're talking about, substances and everything, I'm like, yeah, moderation. So maybe
Sure.
moderation looks like you get laughing gas during Botox and nothing else. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure none of them are becoming addicted to anything or developing any sort of like problematic behaviors. Like honestly, I'd probably critique, plastic surgery before the anesthesia. It's all just a choice. Nothing's hurting anybody. It's all how you engage with it.
The idea though that and I think like what I gather from the LDS church, like part of it is like I mean, do they use like within other like Christian denominations, the body is the temple, like your body is a
Yeah.
temple,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
treat it respectfully and
I think
well.
Paul said that at some point. Yeah, we love it. Yeah.
So I do think that there is something like that's really great, like treating your body kindly and trying not to pollute it too much. And
Right.
there's that is a healthy thought. Um, but it also is interesting, plastic surgery, and I know we're talking a lot about substances, but plastic surgery to me, I am really in or any sort of cosmetic procedure.
Mm.
So later there, who is it? Jesse has a full on like
Vaginoplasty? I don't know what it's called.
I think
I
it's
think it is a labiaplasty.
labia. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called.
Okay, that sounds all
The
right.
spectrum. The spectrum of well, and Taylor talks about her breast augmentation and they're getting
Right.
Botox. They've had their lips done. You can tell, like, and some of them. And then I guess so. The idea of like your body is a temple, we cannot have too much caffeine or alcohol, but I am going to inject what is it like botulism? Like that's what Botox is. It's like something into to paralyze the muscles of my face so that I do not have wrinkles. I find that a very interesting, and I think that's widely accepted, according to again, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. It sounds like that's not frowned upon, like within the church.
Well, that's true. No, it is. I not that I know of, and I mean, it might be frowned upon the same way it is anywhere culturally, right? Like there will be plenty of ways in which that's looked at, but yeah, in terms of the church, it's not. Which is it is really funny because I think you'll look at some religious practices. I'm not super familiar with a lot, but like in Brazil, for example, there's religious denomination I believe that are called the banshees, which means like the believers or whatever. They belong to the Assembly of God, or another one that's like the Congregation of God or something, if I remember. And the thing that stood out to them is women were not to cut their hair. So a lot of the women had very long and unstyled hair, because there's a scripture that says something about it being the natural veil or whatever. I don't know. And you'd have some who didn't think wearing makeup was okay, and you had some where they all had to wear dresses instead of slacks. It's always the women who have the highest restrictions, but men couldn't wear pants or shorts. And so, when I look at that, that's going even further away, further into sort of like physical beauty is not what we should focus on. And I can get behind that, but I think humans are always trying to express themselves, always trying to beautify. Like that's a part of the human existence. Also,
Hold on to that youth, you know?
I mean, yes, that is part of humanity, isn't it? So like I think no matter what, you're always going to have like those ways of wanting to beautify. So I find that interesting. But what I find especially interesting, so let's talk about tattoos for a second, because they talk about it a little. Layla's getting her post-divorce tattoo removal, actually.
But then get another tattoo, like that's symbolic, like or representative of her sister, like her relationship with her sister. She talks about that relationship and her family dynamics, her family of origin.
Yeah. But
That
well, what do I want to say about tattoos? One is in the body of the temple motif. That's something I've heard against tattoos. So Mormons it's frowned upon to get a tattoo. But I think repenting from a tattoo is a difficult process because you repent, but you can't remove it necessarily. And so removing a tattoo is not considered a realistic form of repentance. Whereas a lot of repentance in the church is about like making right what you did wrong or whatever. But I think with tattoos, there's this thing of like, oh, that's a permanent mistake you've got to live with, but you can still be forgiven, but that tattoo is still there. So I think there's a certain amount of like tattoos can be acceptable. But to sort of talk about like what it shows up like culturally, I mean, my mom hates them. In fact, knowing I have tattoos, she sort of can't have a conversation about them without letting me know, like, I don't like tattoos.
like Kayla's mom when she's like, we shouldn't even be here.
It's the same thing. It's like you're talking to somebody that you love and want a relationship with, I think. You seem to be struggling to connect with me sometimes.
Yeah.
What if you don't sort of like expressively voice your opinion against a thing that I permanently have made a decision about, right? Like, I know where you stand. I'm not trying to look good for you, Mom.
Yes. She does not want to give the message that she condones that.
It's just so strange, though. It's sort of like, I would love to have a conversation where I'm like, why are you saying that? Like, what are you trying to do here? Like, we're covering old ground. What do you want to do? So all of that being said, my mother has her eyebrows tattooed on her face.
Really? Like permanent makeup. That's what that is.
Permanent makeup.
That's a tattoo. That's okay. Yeah.
Several women in my family have permanent tattoos, permanent eyeliner. These are tattoos that are okay.
But what's the difference?
What is the difference?
What would your mom say? You should ask her. What would she say?
I don't know. I kind of laughed at her recently when she said that. I was like, well, you've got them on your face. And she was like, oh, I'll talk to you later. Like, I don't know if it registered. But they might say, this is me, putting things the way they should be or could be or whatever, which is also funny to say. But like, she didn't want her eyebrows to go white and then have them be invisible, because then she would be, I guess, an expressionless lady or something like something like that. Or if I'm going to put eyeliner on every day, then why not make it permanent anyway? And nobody questions whether or not makeup is, God's design or something else. So it's just fascinating. I'm like, well, what if I was going to draw this every day? But, what a bargain. Like, it's there permanently.
Bargain.
A time bargain.
Investment is what it is.
Do you know how much money I can make not putting my tattoo on every morning? Saving loads of time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It is interesting. I mean, tattoos not supported. Botox, okay.
Okay. What I will say about Mormons, I don't know if people would agree with me. I think that they try to approximate themselves to sort of like the rest of the world in a way. And there's sort of things that are said like be in the world, not of the world or whatever. So they recognize that there might be a tenuous relationship between certain values and the way the world sees things, and you grow up with that tension. But I really do think that for the most part, Mormons like experience themselves and want to be experienced as like pretty normal and down to earth and like human and all of those things. So the fact that there's a lot of these little discrepancies, I think, like is easy to see and show up. But I think ultimately they're sort of like, yeah, we're wearing makeup, that's normal. We're getting medical care, that's normal. Like I should clarify, Mormons are not like Christian Scientists or uh the Tom Cruise one,
Scientology.
Scientologists, where they're like, no medicine. It really is like under the care of the doctor, you go ahead.
Yeah.
No, they legalize weed. I actually have no idea if anybody's going to their bishop and they're like, I smoke weed for anxiety. I'd be super curious to know if bishops are like, no, or if they're like, that's medical. Like I actually don't know where.
Well, but I also wonder, would there be a difference between someone who is a cancer patient who is prescribed marijuana to help with like chemotherapy, like nausea, secondary chemotherapy, versus anxiety? I don't know. Like, do you think there's a
I don't know. There's a lot. Anytime there's even the slightest gray area, the handbook of instructions, which is really the rule book, that's it that exists in the Mormon church, where leaders and bishops will look at like, well, what do I think about this like thing that I'm not used to hearing about? Um, there are plenty of places that are like these decisions should be made in thoughtful prayer between a person and their doctor or their partner or like whatever. And so there's more of that where it's just like we can't tell you what to do in every situation. You should be like thinking for yourselves. But the way that it shows up, I think, is sometimes people are like a little bit nervous to do that or to make a call or whatever. But but
and
yeah,
I
pro
also think
medical care.
we're really kind of focusing in on some of the discrepancies, as you said, but this is human nature too. Like, I mean, I think we all, like humans, create these sort of rules and parameters, and you can easily, probably in a variety of contexts, point out other behaviors that are contradictory to some of the rules that they've created or identified.
Totally. Yeah, maybe I'm like smoking a cigarette and wearing a seatbelt, and it's like, you do your best. You kind of just try.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, we're just doing this because.
Totally. I will say my mother-in-law did go through chemotherapy, and she's a very devout but realistic person, but like pretty devout. And I think that she was even saying she'd be down for some gummies, but they weren't available in her state. But I think chemotherapy was bad enough that she was like, this would not pose a moral dilemma for me.
Yes. Yes. So, but if I get Botox, I want laughing gas. I don't know if
Heck
that's
yeah.
I am, but I would do it. Let's
And,
I
and
well,
maybe it is the Mormon influence, but I would get Botox for the laughing gas. So
yes. You can get Botox during tattoos. I
I,
mean,
I get
that's how
Botox during tattoos. Do it all the needles.
that's yeah. Yeah.
It is in episode 5 that they mention that they did ketamine, if we want to talk about it now.
Yeah, we can talk about it now. Demi and Whitney had a ketamine therapy session
Mm-hmm.
together, and obviously involves ketamine. But it was thrown out there versus the Botox. There was more of a discussion with the audience, I mean, if you will, about like, yes, we use laughing gas, and Mormons don't, use some, but we will, we can do it here. That the ketamine therapy was just sort of thrown out there as well. When we were doing ketamine therapy afterwards, Whitney admitted to doing this for clout.
Right.
It was not a discussion about, yes, and in addition, we've done ketamine. But so I'm curious, as a professional, what is your opinion on ketamine therapy, just in general, like separate from like how that maybe is viewed like within the LDS?
Well, I might have to work backwards because what I will say is if we're continuing the same conversation, I guess the question I would want to ask is, was the ketamine a necessary part of your treatment, or was it for fun, which is a weird thing to say because I do think ketamine is a very legitimate tool in a therapeutic, especially like sort of like trauma treating um, modality. So I do think it's valid. I have done a ketamine group before that was designed for practitioners, so we could experience the ketamine, kind of know what it was like for our people.
Yeah.
We did participate in the group as if we were patients, but we didn't join the group because we were trying to heal trauma necessarily. We joined because we were practitioners who wanted to like know more about ketamine. So all of that being said, I guess the question that one could ask was, did you exhaust other forms of therapy before jumping to ketamine, or was there something appealing about ketamine that you wanted to do as a Mormon person in this culture where like that's a thing that you could do? I also don't think you have to exhaust all forms of treatment before trying ketamine, but many do. Many people who are like afraid of ketamine would exhaust everything before they try that.
Yeah. Yeah. hmm I think they mention in the episode that they were doing it for trauma, but
Yeah.
they don't go on any more than that. They don't really explain further. It was just thrown out there to support. Demi was using that to support her belief that Whitney really is looking for clout. So she's like, because she said it after ketamine therapy.
I'm not an expert in ketamine, but I do think that ketamine is a tranquilizer who also acts as a hallucinogen or has hallucinogenic properties. The reason that it works therapeutically is still being studied and looked at, but one of the things that people think that is happening is you can experience like the death of ego in ketamine. They call it ego death, where something that happens in the psychedelic response is that all the things you think are so important that you carry that are heavy don't matter as much anymore. And so somebody who's like deeply depressed is often very sort of like too introspective, right? Too many regrets, too much shame, too much self involved, and being able to let go of the self um, as a practice, even like over treatments or whatever, can be a lot of why people can let go of depression because the things that sort of like hold it in place can be dismantled through ketamine. So a totally legitimate practice. Not everybody responds the same way, but that's sort of why ketamine might work.
hmm
I personally think ketamine should be done. I'm just sort of going off, I guess, but I do think ketamine should be done um, with psychotherapy because I have had patients or clients before who were we call it sort of like non-responsive to treatment. So they tried every sort of prescription medication that they could. They had tried therapy as much as they could. They tried both together, and they really didn't want to try TCM, transcranial magnet. So shock therapies and other transcranial
Oh,
magnetic therapies, which show good results. They were really afraid of those, so they went ketamine first.
mhm. Yeah. What is that called?
I think it's transcranial something, which I'm fascinated by. So she does. So this client of mine does ketamine, and they administer ketamine, but then just like there's no therapy surrounding it, and I think it was really like strange and wasn't clear what was happening. I think with ketamine you need a guide.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just one session, it's a series, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not the idea, like it's a series of sessions that you are administered that and monitored.
But I do think that death of ego might let you open up and tell the truth. So I don't know if that's what was part of what Demi was saying. It was like she told me while we were on ketamine, and therefore it's true. But I sort of felt that way. I'm like, oh, you're saying it on ketamine, like you're feeling very, you're feeling very trusted. It's not MDMA exactly, but there's still like, I think an element of like loosening the lips a little bit.
Yes, ECT is what I was thinking you were talking about,
Yes, ECT. Yes.
which is helpful for um, people that have are non-responsive, like their
Yeah,
depression.
treatment resistant depression. Yeah. So anyway, um, obviously consult with your therapist, your doctor about any of this stuff. But that's kind of what I got from that. So it's hard to say. Like I don't have any. I think people should engage in therapies that work for them. And so I'm certainly not saying like, oh, ketamine's the same as the Botox laughing gas. But I wonder. There's at least a question there of
Mhm.
what was on your mind when you were like, I got to try this ketamine therapy. Was it like I'm desperate? What is there? Or was it, oh, I can take ketamine and work on my trauma? Like, down. Okay.
I do think, like, human nature in general, people like to find a quick fix if they can.
Mm,
And so I have found this. I am trained in hypnotherapy. And so
okay.
one of the things I was thinking when you were talking about ketamine, like any like specialized, well, I mean, this exists with talk therapy maybe a little bit. Like they encourage providers to in grad school, like get your own therapy, like recognize that you need to work on yourself. And but like if you do anything like EMDR, which is a trauma therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, or hypnosis, that when a provider goes through that training, part of that is you receive it. You are on the
Mm,
other end. You might not be because it's a training. You're not working on your trauma, but they'll say like, maybe think of something like that's really that would be considered pretty minor, but is still an issue that you can use to see the impact and what that's like for you. And so I'm trained in hypnosis, which honestly isn't all that different from guided imagery or mindful meditation. It's
mhm,
very similar. The differences, honestly, I feel like include the language used and sort of the process of like the steps you take as a clinician to do that. But if you tell someone, a client or a patient, a human, do you want to, I think this hypnosis could really help versus I think this guided imagery can really help. I think people are going to say, well, hypnosis, if they're open to it, feels maybe more potent. It's more powerful. I
mhm,
because of this idea of it's not just a relaxation strategy. There's more to it. And so I think people kind of look for something that maybe is a little bit stronger and could potentially be a quick fix that does not involve having to do other types of work that is required for healing and growth and all of that. But
mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I really agree with that.
so I do think I could see some people saying, I don't want to do therapy, but I'll try the ketamine if that helps. Like that, then I don't have to talk about it a ton. I just go through that. I
Well, and
don't know.
I do think plenty of people are afraid of therapy because it does demand a certain amount of vulnerability where you talk about yourself. And while I can't totally empathize with this, plenty of people have a very hard time talking about their emotions or talking about what's bothering them. And so plenty of people will try medication before therapy because for that reason, it's both maybe a quick direct fix. I think people um who aren't drawn to therapy might have a sense of like they don't think it could be helpful to talk about things. They feel like talking is not action or something like that. I think there's a lot of reasons that people kind of have a hard time engaging in therapy. And it's probably true for a very small percent, but I would say that most people who think that would probably still benefit from therapy also. I'm very pro therapy, obviously.
Yes. I think too, there is this I will hear from people that have never done therapy before. Well, I have my parent or spouse or
Oh,
partner, friend, I talk to them. Like it's just talking. I think that if you don't understand what therapy actually is, it's more than just talking. It's talking in a very different way with a professional than you would with the people in your life and who are trained and understand and can maybe even push you a little bit differently than family and friends. And so yes, so I find that some people that is there. Like what? I can get behind medication because no one else can offer me that, but talking, I just do that with the people in my life. Why would I do that with you?
yeah, that's a really good point. Well, because talking with friends and building your social connections is actually super good for your mental health. So they're conflating it with something that is helpful without recognizing what might be slightly different in talking to a professional. Like talking to your friends is very good for you.
You should. Connection is vital. Like without that, then that really just ruins mental health if you don't have that.
Yeah.
And it does. You need that. You need
Yeah,
people.
no amount of talking to your therapist will uh make up for a lack of social connection. So yes, I agree with you on all points. Speaking of therapy, though, bravo to Taylor's therapist, whoever that is,
Yes.
because and maybe we can talk about this a little later, but I don't know. Should we talk about Whitney now?
Let's do it.
Throughout these three episodes, 3, 4, and 5, a lot about Whitney, but one of them is this confrontation with Taylor, and I just am so like blown away by Taylor now versus Taylor season 1, how she's sort of like holding her composure, how she's talking about the right things and like sort of zooming in on those. So there's so many ways which that could be Taylor and other people in her life also. I'm crediting her therapist who I've heard nothing about because I like to assume that therapy is the answer. But she's doing awesome.
Yeah. I think she is too. I think that she has shown a lot of growth. I know we talked about this last episode. But she seems more introspective. She is taking more accountability for her actions. She is communicating really well. So this is actually comes into play the next episode. Well, which episode is the girls' trip?
That's 4.
When she gives an apology for something, which we could maybe talk about at some point now later. But I thought she did a really great job with that or no, it was the discussion with Whitney. I thought she did a good job at talking to her about like Whitney's experience, and it just seemed very mature to me.
Yeah. So this conversation does sum up a lot of what happens in these episodes, but basically Whitney, starting a little bit in episode 2, but in episode 3, you really start to see it where she is talking negatively about Taylor, saying, I don't know if we want to be friends with her. I don't know if she's bad for the brand. So she's saying that to everybody who she'll listen to. She's in the salt room with Michaela saying it. She's saying it everywhere. She's saying it at Botox, where Jen is like, should I invite her to the baby shower? And Whitney's like, I wouldn't. And it's lost a little bit within the broader discussion of like, should I invite the sinners who are drinking in the hot tub to the baby shower? But she asks about Taylor, and Whitney's like, no. And it's so interesting because I see Michaela, Layla, a lot of the others who don't sort of like aren't as vocal, but I'm looking at their facial expressions, and it really is sort of like, it seems like some people are like, let's all stay together. Maybe even because it's good for the brand. Like, I don't know how they really feel about each other, but ultimately they're like, we're on the show together. Why are you doing this? And
Yeah.
and Whitney is doing it, I think, oblivious that people aren't necessarily on board with her.
Yes.
So she's saying all these things behind their backs. She doesn't go to Taylor's baby shower in the end of episode 2, which is like a big deal. And Taylor's like, what's going on? And so at this girls' trip, she's like, we're going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this moment in the car they're driving up because Taylor's in a different car. I think she's in a car with Demi and some others. And she's sort of talking about that. And Demi's like, well, I've got your back if things go down. And I kind of see Taylor sort of like maybe surprised at that moment. There's like, oh, some of you have my back. Like, I think Taylor up until now has just been feeling like I really am you know, the bad one in the group that nobody wants to be behind. So I think she's a little surprised to hear that some people are like, no, we're here for you.
Yeah. I think Taylor has worked really hard. The theme of Queen Bee comes up a lot throughout this whole season in these episodes that we're talking about. Who is Queen Bee? Is it Taylor? Is it Whitney? Taylor doesn't seem to be really like vying for that spot, but the only time there was a point where someone, I think Jesse, looked at Demi and was like, you should be Queen Bee. And then they cut to an interview with Taylor where she just like, yeah. Mm-hmm. That was the only time that I observed Taylor to have any opinion about like that title, that role. But yeah, I think she's worked hard. So therapy works. It does.
The dynamics are kind of interesting in this because as you follow it, there does become this incident which does a division of saints and sinners, where at least they all examine sort of like some of us are invited, some of us aren't. There's a division in terms of like our devotion, to the baby blessing. That was an early moment, I think, when I found Whitney pretty off-putting when she's sort of saying like members of the church are like this, or like, I have standards, or I don't know. She's saying it in a way where I'm like, oh gosh, that didn't come across very well, but who knows how that was produced and filmed. So I don't know how, I mean, I'd be really curious to know what other people think. Like, I don't know how much of this division between Whitney and others has anything to do with church's standards. It's brought up a little bit there. It doesn't seem like it to me, like that's the main dynamic. Because what everybody who talks about Whitney says, even those who are like sympathetic to her, everybody's saying things like, Whitney thinks she's this way, but she can be a little this way. Or, like she likes to think that she's, open-minded, but really she causes drama or like whatever. So there's all this questioning where the friends are sort of like challenging her reality a little bit to the camera, to the audience.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is on board with her breaking up the group the way that she is. So it does feel weird that they talk about how Whitney is grappling with the queen bee mentality, where it seems like her problem with Taylor is coming from how she feels about that competition or something.
Yes.
And I have to wonder if that's true, because when Taylor's really trying to be direct and be like, what is it? How do I address it? Whitney has a very hard time justifying her like disdain for Taylor. And so like I have to think people are onto something there a little bit, that like, okay, there might be things she can point to, but ultimately like this is a personality clash, or a queen bee crash.
Yes. So during the girls' trip for Macy's birthday, let's talk about the truth box game. Okay. Like,
Yes, I'd love to.
Yes. This game was a bad idea and an excellent idea for the show. But if my girlfriends were like, let's have a birthday weekend celebrating our dear friend we love dearly. Also, there's this truth box game where we're all going to write questions that we don't want to say out loud and own, and then someone pulls out one question, and then we get to ask each other hard truths. And be like, know about that, friends, but they did that. And so the question is like, is Whitney jealous of Taylor because of the clout she has?
I think they say clout. Social media clout.
Yes. And Whitney says no, but she says that she is bothered that everyone seemed to forgive Taylor so quickly for the swinging scandal. Then you see Taylor's face, like the camera like moves, and she's like,
really?
Yeah. But they did not forgive her for the RSV video, which I'm obsessed with, by the way.
So for those who haven't seen, I saw it once. Her child has RSV. I don't know what that means, but they're like not doing well.
Virus. It's not good. It's scary for babies. Like you can have it as a kid, as an adult, you can have it, but it's scary for babies.
So apparently on a day when the baby's doing a little better, this is what Macy says. Oh, he's doing a little better. Some good news. Wanted to celebrate. But she sort of has the baby in front of the camera, and she's in the background doing her dancing.
The baby is in the little hospital bed.
Like the incubator, that sort of thing.
The baby's in there, and yeah, and she's like,
and people didn't like it. People were like, this is in bad taste.
Yes. And it certainly was in bad taste. But also, I don't remember if I said this the first episode or not, because we might have, or I don't remember. But anyway, I've thought this. She is postpartum. Like that baby looks a month old, maybe two. The baby is not older than 2 months. And she is postpartum. Your judgment during that period, like the hormones, you're not sleeping. This is a huge stressor. Like your baby has RSV. You have to go to the hospital for that. So I kind of want to give her some slack in that, like, she might not have made that decision under different circumstances. Was it a poor decision? Yes, I feel like it was. It wasn't just that she was doing a video while her baby was in the background receiving inpatient medical care. It was the captions that was, I think, really resonated with people. It was something like, my baby like couldn't breathe for hours. And she's like, It was the combination of the two that felt really off-putting, and like I don't know, like I'm worried about your child. That's scary, but you're like dancing, and so like I don't know how to feel about this. It's very confusing. And so yeah, I think that's what people were reacting to.
Well, I think that's helpful because to me, I guess I also don't care. Like I think I find all of influencing to be cringy enough that to me that it's a little funny. It's kind of like the conversations we've been having of like where somebody's line is, where somebody else is, where I'm just sort of like, oh, this bothers you, but just the existence of the social media influencer doesn't. So I'm not sure the difference. I think when they were kind of trying to talk compassionately about Whitney, it did make sense to me, which is like, you're throwing things to see what sticks because that's what you do as an influencer. You're filming your life and this is going on. And so all the things you're saying are totally true. Like when you see videos of like the nurse crying because she lost a patient and it's like you set up your camera to show you have a breakdown. Like you are gonna audiences are gonna have a reaction to that where they're just like, oh, you're kind of breaking the illusion of you being a real person and now you're a gross person. So like I do think that's what happened. But at the end of the day, especially with the gotcha of like she admitted over ketamine that she was doing that for likes, I just want to be like, of course she was. Like it could be both, right? It could be sort of like I'm
Yeah.
worried about my baby, but like
Yeah.
this is my whole gig. Like this is all I do is film myself. I got to figure out a way to make content. So like to me, the fact that she's getting any hate over this is sort of just weird to me because I'm like, who cares? Like whatever. But I can
I
understand.
I thought it was hilarious. I mean, not that the kid, I'm glad that her child is healthy and safe and made it
Yeah.
through that. But like, I think the idea is very funny to me, very entertaining. Um, but also, yeah, I mean, like all of any sort of influencer um type role, like it is attention seeking. You're looking for attention, you're looking for likes, you're hoping to have an audience so that then brands will want to like
Yeah.
talk with
And
you and you it's funny. So
it
it's
reminds me of like a friend I had many years ago who loved Oprah, but then when he discovered that all of the giveaways that were done on the Oprah show were not coming from Oprah, but were just like part of the program budget and everything, he felt so betrayed. And it's just, I mean, it's just fascinating. Like, you want this idea of people being like really great and benevolent, and you like peeking behind the curtain. So you have social influencers like giving money to homeless people to film it and whatever. And there's a lot of complications, but this was at least like her child, herself, her life. She wasn't like out there exploiting others for clout. She was just exploiting her lived experience for clout, which is like her job. That's the most I'm going to say in defense of Whitney, probably for the rest of like our podcast. But
I
I
don't
think
yeah,
it's funny.
I don't I I feel like there should be some line, like maybe not if your child is sick, which is a very stressful time, like maybe just don't do that. Like unless it's like an after thing, like we just went through this. I'm so happy that like we made it on the other
The
side.
after thing would be very appropriate.
Yes, but like during feels, and even if um I feel like there's a way, especially when kids are involved, that you can do it. That's a little bit.
The nature of exploiting a child's experience for parents is already under scrutiny. Yeah, that's true.
Yes. I've had this conversation a couple times in different separate from the show, but in different contexts. But it's like when someone that you know has very real health issues. Like they have like a health medical diagnosis that involves maybe really challenging medical symptoms. But when you talk to them, there feels like there's like some attention seeking
Hmm.
type pull. And so what oftentimes people then respond, they then look at that person as if maybe their medical symptoms aren't really that bad, or maybe they're not even true. And because they're kind of picking up on maybe that pull for attention seeking, and then it minimizes, but both can be true. Like what you said, you can have health issues and you can also be looking for attention. And so it doesn't mean that just because someone is maybe engaging in some attention-seeking behavior that they also don't have these health issues.
Totally.
And so, but people then react to the attention seeking, which then tends to be off-putting, like, oh, and can fall in, to some question.
I mean, that can be a challenging conversation even to have, I think, with clients, because on the one hand, we were talking about the importance of social connection, and being able to talk about your true experience is important. So somebody who is really sick or is really depressed or whatever, but the other part that just is a fact of life is there is a limit and a way in which you share things that will affect the reception of them. And that might not be fair. If you're very sick and you're talking about your sick situation, and you're talking about your medical condition, and people get tired of hearing about it, that sucks. It does suck. And maybe we should all be able to, and maybe we should all be more patient. But what you're saying is just a truth also, is like people kind of won't be there for it, and they'll feel it and hear it in different ways.
Which is why therapy is helpful. Go to therapy.
Yeah, this is our pro therapy episode. But it's true, yeah. It's not a good strategy to dance with your sick child, it sounds like, for your social media clout.
Yes, to conclude that, yes. Not. But the truth box game, so questions like, hey Whitney, are you jealous of Taylor because of her clout? Hey Taylor, would you leave Dakota if you found out that he slept with someone before you became official?
Ask Macy.
Yes. Hey, Demi called Jen too Mormon. And then this is all what came out. And then Demi called Taylor white trash. All of this came out. It's just a fun girls' weekend.
So I have to say this about the truth box. This is one where I'm like, did the producers write these questions? Did they, whatever. So I'm a group therapist. That's probably my biggest jam, right? Is like group therapy. So the idea of having honest conversations about like these underlying quiet things we're not addressing is a good idea.
Yeah. No.
And this was a terrible way to execute that good idea.
Yes. It is healthy to, if you have an issue with someone, you go talk about it. You're like, I'm feeling this way. This was kind of calling people out on things that they weren't wanting to admit, and not bad. I mean, I do think like maybe we need to uncover some of the latent aggression that is existing between people, but it didn't feel like maybe the right setting. I don't know. Or maybe it was the best setting.
They didn't have a facilitator there, right? Like everybody in the room had feelings about it, except for maybe Layla and Michaela and some of those who don't talk as much, but they weren't ready to facilitate the conversation either. So like, Macy would have been the best. But basically that's part of the problem I see, is everybody there had their feelings. There wasn't like a facilitator to sort of like manage the conversation in a way that could have been more productive. I'm not saying it wasn't productive, honestly, ultimately, but it sure wasn't fun. And it was for somebody else's birthday party. So like, if it really was Demi's idea of like, we're going to do this for your birthday party, that's shit. Like that is.
How dare you? Yes. No, I agree completely. It was for someone's birthday party. Okay. Not to keep talking about the Real Housewives, but huge fan, obviously. Andy Cohen, I think, should have some honorary degree in mental health counseling, the way he facilitates these group chats. So at the end of every season, he is the host of the reunion. So these women have watched the whole season at that point. They see what the others are saying about them in the private interviews. So not only do they have these sort of group dynamics that they are aware of, but now they are watching, like, okay, you spoke to so and said this about me. You were in the interview chair and you're saying this about me, and I did not know that. And so then they all come together and they have to work through. That's the point of the reunion, is to kind of like have some accountability, to talk, to review the season, but to maybe repair some ruptures that have occurred. And I think Andy Cohen actually does a really great job at this. If you watch him, you probably have you?
I haven't, but I'll have to check it out.
It's a little bit hard if you don't know any of the dynamics with the cast, but I mean, you can still observe. Like Andy, I think he does a really good job at talking about things and having, I mean, essentially, like what I think the purpose of the truth box conversation is you said this, how do you really feel? Like, can we get to a place where we can sort of understand each other more and resolve this?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does a good
So,
job.
so my commentary on some of the things that came up in the truth box are, if you have unresolved, I mean, I'm not going to say there's a right way or a wrong way, I guess, to hash out like real things that happened, but I mean, there probably are. But you had gossip, right? Like, so some people were like, probably Whitney, right? It was like, hey, Demi, why did you call Taylor white trash, right? So like that's not coming from either of them of like we have a thing we want to resolve it. That is sort of like I said a thing behind your back that was like judgmental and catty or something like that. And that was said and probably doesn't need to go anywhere because so I kind of started to become a mini fan of Demi in this. I don't think that she quite has the emotional intelligence of Michaela yet so far, right?
Macy.
Or Macy, sorry, yeah. Yeah, Michaela's too quiet.
Yes, yeah.
Of Macy. But she, like I'm appreciating some of the ways that she's showing up and she's like, yes, I made this comment that that you were kind of white trash because like, I don't know, you're like pregnant with somebody for the second time that you're still not sure about the relationship with and the whole swinger scandal and that's like white trash. And she sort of like she goes through that and says all of that, but she like made a comment at some time based on Taylor's decisions and somebody tried to like stir the pot and bring it back.
I will say though, okay, so talking about Taylor's growth, so Demi, her defense of that was you were flirting with my husband. You kind of like came on to him ish or like acted in a way. Do you remember this part? She was like, you were like leaning over the couch and like talking to my husband and
Oh yeah.
felt like I felt like you were flirting with him. And so I thought Taylor did a really good job at responding. Like, well, let's talk about when you like were not wearing a shirt and in front of Dakota. And Demi was like, I was miking up. This is different. And she was like, you did not have to do that. You chose to do that. Dakota felt very uncomfortable. And so Demi said, that's very different. And so then Taylor said, which I thought this was 100% true. If I did that in front of your husband, don't you think you'd have a problem with that? And she's like, no. I thought, oh, hands down. Yes. You can look at it like Demi, and I like Demi. I'm a huge fan, but I mean, maybe was like, I don't think she was trying to seduce Dakota, but I do think that if Taylor did that, like she's not wearing a shirt, she's like, I'm just miking up. Like, I think that everyone would be like, you're seducing men, you're seducing our men. And they would have had a reaction to it. And so I was like fully on board with Taylor's defense of that. I was like, I mean, and again, both can be true. Demi can feel like that's inappropriate. And that doesn't also mean that maybe some things that Demi has done, like doesn't make people feel like a certain way or that but I do think that they would have viewed it differently if Taylor did it. And the idea of like, which I think is really interesting, swinging, like Demi says something like you're out there like seducing husbands. And I was like, that is not what swinging is supposed to be. Like they all were in agreement. That was the whole reason why Taylor outed the whole group, I think, of their swinging involvement is that I am not here seducing husbands. We all agreed to swing and swap. And that's fine if everyone's consenting. And then she did take it a little bit further, but that seems like it wasn't her. It was like her and the guy.
Sure.
Catch feelings is the youth.
Well, that is super interesting because I think I felt differently about that moment. But those are all very good points. So I thought Taylor was a little defensive and missing the mark in that moment, even though, I've already said how well I thought she did. Only because maybe I bought Demi's story, which is like at the time that the swinging was happening, maybe they were like, I mean, when you're swinging and trying to figure out like who else is down, like it's got to be a little bit of a tricky sort of like, whatever. So maybe she was doing that and maybe Demi was picking up on some very real sort of like they're trying to bring us into the group and that's trashy. I don't know. but I didn't think about that very much. But I gotta say, as like a theater kid, I really did think the idea of like I'm in my bra, which covers the same thing that my bathing suit covers, and we've all been in hot tubs, and I'm putting a mic on. Like, I took that as so benign that I thought Taylor was being weird about it. And I thought it pointed, this is how I was like interpreting it. I thought it pointed to the Dakota, which Demi said, right? And maybe I'm already on her side, where she was like, that sounds like a Dakota problem. He's like, oh, she's got her shirt off wearing a bra again that covers more than her bathing suit that I've seen her in. That made me uncomfortable. It's like I was
I
on the side of I'm like, get over it, Dakota. Like, be a theater kid. You're in your dressing room. You're doing your stuff. She's not coming on to you. She's just like thinking it's no big deal because it shouldn't be a big deal. That's how I was feeling.
I actually, that's a good point. I agree. It sounds like Taylor maybe had more of a problem with it. I mean, if Dakota was like, that's
Right.
weird. But she should have just said, like, just speak for speak for yourself. Like, did you feel weird about that, Taylor? Like, because if you do, that's also fine because Demi felt weird about the way Taylor was talking. And also I like Demi, and so she probably wasn't wrong. Sorry, here's my cat. In that I'm sure if she was seeing Taylor talk to her husband, she was like bending over the couch. I think they were like drinking. Um, there probably was some vibe energy that she was picking up that was like, this doesn't feel comfortable for me right now, but you all are choosing to stay friends with each other. I don't know. I mean, I know they're on a show and everything, but I guess if I felt like a friend was intoxicated and like heavily flirting with my spouse, I might be like, do I want to keep hanging out with them? Like, I
Sure,
don't,
that's disrespectful. Yeah.
maybe not. I don't think I want to keep doing that, or I'm going to address it. Like, you can't do that. Like, you need to be a little bit more respectful of our relationship.
So here's what I'll say. They kind of are going at it in the group. Somebody in the group, I think again, Macy is sort of like, maybe you should have this conversation in private. And she's like, we're in the middle of it, like whatever. They decide to finish it later. I actually do think they have a good productive conversation because and this I think is where I actually did like Demi and Taylor because they're pretty real with each other. She's sort of saying like, look, this was a one-off comment. I did make it. It was about that. It's not like
Mhm.
I'm going on about it. And Taylor's like, I don't want to sleep in the same room as you tonight. And she's like, you're the pregnant one. You need to be comfortable. She like took the other bed. Like I thought the resolution was actually quite lovely.
I did too. I thought Demi did. So I think I conflated like a couple arguments earlier today when I said Taylor did a good job apologizing. I was thinking Demi did a good job of apologizing.
Mm. Hmm.
I think she was like, yeah, not a kind thing to say.
Right.
Uh, and if you want to like sleep separately, I get that. And I am comfortable sleeping in a bunk bed or wherever, somewhere else. I thought it was a really nice, and Taylor seemed like not mad, but just like, yeah, I just need some space. I thought it seemed really healthy, the
It
resolution.
did. Well, and I think you see that it was healthy later because pretty quick Demi shows up for Taylor again. You know what I mean? Like I think you can see what it looks like to have that kind of resolution. And so like research has shown, you want to look up like Gottman research, for example, with couples or whatever, there are ways to have productive arguments and they're not always what we think. Some people think if you raise your voice or say mean things or whatever, like that's like a disaster, that's wrong, that's toxic. But what you see is sort of like, I'm feeling this way. I'm mad at you. I called you trailer trash. That's not good. But this idea of like, I'm going to listen to you. I care about our friendship. Like they prioritize sort of the healing about it. Like you can have a pretty bad argument with somebody, but if you can resolve it well, or if you argue well, that's a predictor of like a good relationship.
Yes, I agree. It's the repair. I mean, enough damage can uh occur that it's you can't repair it depending on the acts like that
Totally.
but in general, yeah, it's the repair that counts. Like, can you get to a place where you both feel heard and respected? And this felt very like validating and respectful, the conversation versus
By contrast,
yes, same page, the conversation with Whitney and Taylor,
it's
which
just a disaster from start to finish because of Whitney.
because of Whitney, she just she can't. And I think like I think what you said earlier is true. Like she just I don't think she's fully able to acknowledge like what she's feeling, whether that's like she just is not aware of it entirely, like what's going
That's what
on,
I think.
or willful ignorance. I don't know, but she, yeah,
And listen, I've been Whitney in this situation, right? I've been where like I'm unreasonably mad, and if somebody was just like, "What is the deal with us?" It would be a whole thing, right? To figure out like, I don't know, like I think I hate you, like I don't like whatever. And I so like I did have empathy for the confusion maybe she felt and like, well, what do I say to articulate like what, like what do I understand about myself, all of those things. So like I even with my empathy, I'm watching this and just sort of like seeing it unfold. But Taylor's on it. She's like, I want to work on it. And Whitney is saying things that under some circumstances I think are like good boundaries of like, I actually didn't feel like I owed you a conversation. Like I've had somebody wrong me where they're like, I want to talk about it and get through it. And I'm like, I think I'm done, right, with our relationship. Like I think I'm done. But like, why are you buying her mom talk sweats and like doing a mom talk? You're on a show together, so there's that.
yes,
So I can appreciate her sort of being like, we're not good enough friends for me to care.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's how Whitney processes this and feels justified, but doesn't recognize that she's being so weird and passive aggressive about it. So Whitney's reasons, help me with this if you remember differently. Whitney's reasons were like, I realized we're not as good of friends. Like you didn't show up for me. You didn't ask me, "Hey, how are you and Connor doing?" And Taylor's like, "I feel like I did that." And if you
Yeah,
roll back the tape, she did do that.
yeah,
She
yeah,
did ask. She didn't just jump into her own thing. And then she describes her own thing the same way we did, which is like, "Oh, I try to relate, but I'm glad you said that. I took the feedback. I'm like, yes, Taylor, this is you taking accountability. I took the feedback of like, I'm trying to relate, but I know I need to empathize more and then try to relate and like whatever." So like Taylor's just like doing her therapy work right there in front of Whitney.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that pisses her off more. I think it pisses her off more.
yes. I agree completely. And I think because Whitney's also not being honest with herself, she's grasping at straws, and the examples that she's given are not resonating and with the others. And I think that because it doesn't feel authentic, like there's some, okay, that can be true. You can be upset by this. Also, it seems like there's something else going on, and we're just not admitting it to ourselves as
Yeah.
to the animosity.
Like
And
Jesse did the same thing. You don't seem to care as much.
yes, yes. And so Demi says something while they're upstairs talking, Taylor and Whitney. Yeah, Demi says something like her biggest issue is with herself because she feels competition with Taylor. And
Hmm.
she doesn't like that. And it's not really it's not really like what Taylor has done as much as this again, like kind of queen bee competition. But I do think that there is some internal conflict within Whitney because she doesn't want to leave the group. No one's joining her. She doesn't want to be around Taylor anymore. And so she just doesn't know how to handle it, how to navigate that. Like I don't like you. Yeah, I don't like you, but I don't want to walk away from this entirely. But like she kind of tries a little bit, but she's like upset. I have to say that and this is I think in the fifth episode, they go on the women go to the what is it, like the smash room? Is that what they call it? Like where you go like break things?
I wrote Rage Room. I don't know if they named it, but yeah.
That's it, the rage room. I thought it was so the editing was really good going back and forth between the women, like smashing it. And then it's like Whitney's like, I mean, talking to Connor, like, I don't know. I'm not going to say that I wanted them to reach out to me. I didn't do that because I wanted them, but also I would have done that to them. I would have reached out to them. And then to their erasure, but I thought it was so good, very entertaining.
So the timeline of this is Taylor tries to sit Whitney down and have a conversation. Whitney is, like you said, just like trying to see what sticks. Is like, I don't like how you did this, I did this, and Taylor's being really clear, and I want to work on it. And again, Whitney's like, I don't care to work on it, and Taylor's probably like, we're in business together. All these women here want us to work on it because we're all in business together. Um, so Demi comes up. I'm not sure if she needed to or not, but she comes up like pretty fiery on Taylor's side and is just like, for 2 years, you've been talking crap about Taylor. And I love Whitney does this weird pivot where she just nothing's wrong, right? Like I think she's probably got a little narcissistic personality disorder or something. Can't diagnose. Who knows?
Diagnosed, but
But but she just like literally cannot take accountability for that. So she actually turns to Taylor as if this is going to be slam dunk. Did you care that I didn't tell you I was coming? Yeah, that's why I'm having this conversation. I thought things were good until you didn't show up. She's just like so like, oh, everything I do is just kind of like fine. And I'm like imitating Demi, imitating her, which is like, oh, it's all about me. She really is doing that. It's just crazy. And then at the end, when they're really sort of like get down to this point that I think is inarguable, right? Well, I'm sort of like, okay, you've really like argued down to this point where it's clear you should have done something different. And the first thing Whitney says is like, I don't regret anything I said. Like, it's just
yes.
amazing.
She is digging her heels in, and she is like, I am not going to waver or move an inch. And everyone else is kind of like, so the people that are supporting Whitney are Macy and Michaela in that episode,
Hmm.
out of like loyalty. Like
And Jen, yeah, the Saints.
it's like when you comfort your friend, but you don't agree with what they did, but you're like, I love you anyway. Like, and I'm here for you. And yes, you can be sad. So in that back and forth, where the camera's cutting between like the rage room and then the Connor, Whitney says something like, they know, like, I care about what other people think. And she goes, and I think people take advantage of that. Like, I thought that was a very funny line. People take advantage of the fact that she cares what people think. She's upset. And who is going to be the queen bee?
I think that this argument is a good example of a few things because while I agree with Demi a lot in this conversation, she gets a little fiery and heated. She's like, well, then you're a bad friend, which I was agreeing with, right? Like that's your final conclusion. Whitney walks away. And then Demi does what I think a lot of people would do, but the not helpful thing was like, oh, and then you just walk away, right? So she's like mad. She's mad about the disengagement, which is like both understandable, but could reflect poorly on Demi at this point. She goes to her like closet to be with the Saints to talk about how everybody's shitty, and they're giving her good, I think, support in that moment while sort of being like, yeah, they're really coming at you, right? Nobody's sort of saying like it's not, or you're justified, but they're sort of saying that. Demi chases her up there, and Michaela, no, sorry, who do I like? Macy. Macy's like, you're being a bitch right now, which is the strongest sort of like call out of all that Macy ever does, I think, is just like, in this moment, you're being a bitch because she's trying to get away and you're chasing her in here and you're throwing it in her face. I also get how she feels, right? She's just like, you're walking away from a conversation, you're not doing your part. I think it's a good example of sort of showing like, well, like what are the dynamics that make you wrong or right? The way you show up in the argument, does that make you wrong or right? Do the things you argue make you wrong or right? And then my favorite is Michaela, who's like, we had reservations at 6. And so they all have to go to dinner. And the look on Whitney's face when everybody's like, oh, we got to go. And they get up and she realizes like something has taken the place of her attention. That's how I read it.
Yes.
So disappointed that everybody's like, dinner reservations are important. And she's like, but my life and me. And then just to mention, she's at the table visibly having a hard time and is like, how can they all be having a good time? And it's like, because you're on TV, you're performers. Like, what is wrong with you not understanding this? So she goes, the producer is obliged to talk to her. You going to be okay? Oh, yeah, I just need to cry and get over with. And then she comes in with a cake and a toilet paper stuck to her shoe.
That producer and the camera, the zooming into the toilet paper, y'all are messy. Like, messy.
So mean, kicking her while she's down. She doesn't know she's down, but she is.
Someone was like, we're just gonna let her keep that toilet paper on. Like, someone could have been like,
yeah, you had options. You chose chaos.
no, and let's zoom in on it, actually. She leaves the group chat.
Which is a huge catalyst in the show.
Big statement, leaving the group chat. She is letting everyone know she is done. I know we're bouncing around a lot, but that was like her line in the sand. I am done. And I think that conversation when the other women were in the rage room that she had with Connor did seem to kind of, I don't know, support the idea that it was a little bit attention seeking. She kind of wanted someone to say, because she just kept, that's what she kept emphasizing. I would have reached out. I would have said, hey, are you okay? Hey, not if it was Taylor, you would not have. You would have said, good riddance. She's bad for our image. And but I would have, but I'm not saying I wanted that, but I would have done that. And
Whitney thinks she's playing chess and she is playing checkers.
I also think she's really good at this sort of the villain arc. I think she's good at it, but whether she's leaning into it or not, I'm not sure. But I think she is isolating, alienating herself, and that's not what she actually really wants. And she's having a hard time getting what she wants, is what it sounds like.
Well, she is, and that's what this is why I so disliked her, following these episodes, because she doesn't know how transparent she's being, but she's being so transparently manipulative, and they're not having it anymore, and it's frustrating her. And that is like so delicious for me to watch, because that is not how you communicate. You had your chance to be direct, and instead you did this. I leave the chat. I just needed space. They shouldn't have taken it. Why didn't they invite me? I love Connor. Why didn't they invite you again? Because I left the chat. Oh, right. I forgot about that. Like, Connor, I'm reading into this, but he is just like the most exhausted cookie maker at this point in the episode, because he knows that she's wrong, I think. And she's just venting all about how wronged she is. And it's just like, man, are you making your own bed and not finding it comfortable?
So at Layla's divorce party, Jesse and Whitney have a side conversation. And Jesse tells Whitney, everyone in the group is talking about you or mad at you. That's essentially what she says. And I was like, okay, all right. We're being very direct without the truth box game. I like it. So she's
But it is honest.
It's honest, yeah. And Whitney cries and wants to leave. But I thought, like, is this news to you? Like, did you not know that? You felt that, and then you left the group chat, and you didn't think that people were going to chatter about it? Like, yes, they're all going to, like, have their little side conversations. And she's like, I'm going to leave, which is her
go-to move. I'm back from Hawaii, but I'm leaving again.
She has a hard time sitting in discomfort. Yes.
She does. She does. And that's hard. I mean, listen, I hope it's not true, but I would strongly predict that Whitney one day is going to be one of these estranged parents whose children don't talk to her, and she can't figure out why. Because she's doing this same maladaptive relational behavior that shows up in those ways. She wants to be chased and pursued, and people are tired of it. And so they don't chase and pursue her, which honestly is like respecting the decision. Oh, you left the group chat? We're not going to invite you things. Or the things that we say in the group chat you don't hear about because you left the group chat. And she is so offended by them not taking the bait.
It's like any job that you have. Like, if you want to succeed professionally in some area, some line of work, it is important that you can realistically examine your strengths and your weaknesses and be honest, so that I can address what I'm weaker on and work on improving. If you want to be good at relationships, you have to do the same thing. So you have to say, like, this is what I did that's helpful for my relationship. This is what I'm doing that is not so helpful. How can I improve upon that? Just with any skill, interpersonal dynamics, it's a skill you can learn. And so I think that if you are unwilling to really have an honest look inwardly and identify, like, what is my part of this? What is my role? What could I have done differently? And address that, take accountability, then yeah, you're going to be bad at relationships. So they leave. I want to say, though, this is completely unrelated, but there was a point at Layla's divorce party where they're sitting at a table. Connor had a bottle of sparkling grape juice, and he was like, you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. He took the bottle of sparkling grape juice, and he's like, I know how to open it, because they didn't know how to open it, or they're having a hard time. And he's hitting it on the table.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I was like watching it thinking, like, sir, we saw you take your first sip of champagne ever, I personally don't. I'm scared to honestly open a champagne bottle or sparkling wine. I don't want to like the noise, and I'm afraid like it's gonna fly off. So like no judgment, but like you're hitting it against the table. I don't think that that's how that works. With I mean, you could do
You
that with
saw it in a movie.
it's like a party trick with a beer bottle, right? Like that's not. But like with a champagne, does that happen? Like you like bump it against and it like I don't think so, but I thought it was funny, like the person who's never had alcohol before, who just had their first sip, but also like I don't think you do that with any sort of sparkling bottled beverage.
I got it.
Yeah.
The last things that stood out to me from these episodes revolve a little bit around church stuff. Garments, we didn't talk about too much. So it's probably easy enough to kind of Google what garments are or whatever. But garments are like an underwear that people who have been through the temple and made a certain endowment, or it's called the endowment, a certain covenant make. And it is that they will wear the garments during all reasonable activities, which kind of has been translated or sort of seen as different things. So you have people who are like, they'll take them off only for swimming and sex and showering. You've got others who will take them off to work out or mow their lawn, and you will have the neighbors of those people who are like, they shouldn't be taking them off for those reasons. You'll have people like Donny Osmond who goes shirtless in Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and members who are like, he's not wearing his garments in the play. So you'll have like different views of this, but the garment is basically like a short sleeved t-shirt type thing, and then a to the knee boxer short kind of thing for men, and women are similarly. Um, and people will covenant to wear those for their life, and they have markings in them that are reminders of their relationship with God. So like I would kind of compare it to like the kippah that Jewish people might wear, or those I don't know what they're called, but the things that they'll wear under their clothes. Orthodox Jews will often wear, and you'll kind of see the strings underneath their clothing. It's close to, so it's, you know, religious attire that's not so unknown to other religious folks. But of course, I guess the way that it's most ridiculed is like Mormons in their magic underwear, or their holy underwear, or like whatever is the best way to, you know, make light of it, I think, that people have.
You without and tell me if this is a disrespectful question. Do you wear underwear under the garments, or is that your underwear?
That is your underwear.
Okay.
And so people who, for example, don't find them supportive enough might wear underwear over them or a bra over them, is
Okay.
traditionally been what I've seen. That might be changing a little bit. Some different things are happening, and I could talk probably too much about garments, basically. But that's what Jen Affleck is referring to when she's like, guys, I forgot my garments. Because you are supposed to wear them all the time. And if you don't wear them, it's like a decision not to wear them. And one of those things they ask you if you're going to go in the temple is like, do you wear your garments day and night? Meaning, do you sleep in them? Do you wear them all the time? And
Mhm.
that's like an expectation.
Oh, so someone in the group calls Jen the garment queen, which to me sounds like not all of them do that. I mean, I would assume like that some people are maybe a little bit more consistent, or that's a bigger priority in wearing. Like when I hear someone in a group where they maybe all have a shared belief system calls one person a garment queen, that makes me think that there is a difference in terms of that behavior within the group.
Yeah, I honestly find that a little odd, and I think this probably comes back to whether it's in this episode or the next. Did this come out in the Truth Box that somebody's talking about Jen being too Mormon?
Yes,
And
two. Mhm.
this could be an expression of that, where like maybe I assume that those who consider themselves to be devout and adherent are wearing them because you must. And I haven't really been watching their, you know, their hemlines or whatever as closely as like, you know, maybe my mother would to try to figure out if they're wearing them or not. So I haven't really noticed or been clocking whether or not people are wearing them. Um, but I would assume that those who say that they're the saints, so that would be Jen and Macy and Whitney, I would assume that they're wearing their garments because that's like, it's a high priority. If you have made that covenant to wear them, you're supposed to be wearing them. And if you're not, that's an issue. Now, whatever, there's other things we could go into, right? But I would assume that they're wearing them or expected to wear them. I actually
The
wonder how Jen forgot them. I'm not sure what they were doing beforehand, but she was like, "This is a garment-free activity." I'm curious, but like, it's interesting she forgot them. What I was just gonna say, and then the question of like, so do you have any underwear? And she's like, "No." That's not surprising. That is your underwear. So it wasn't like she packed alternatively. She somehow forgot to pack her underwear.
I I missed that part. Yeah, I didn't catch that. Interesting. Um, the idea of two Mormon, where do you fall on the Mormon scale? This comes up a lot. The saints sinners, it's a theme. I find it very fascinating. We talked about this earlier. There are different identity models, identity development models. There's a religious identity development model that is basically like the different stages that one can go through as their faith becomes more integrated into their life, their personality, their beliefs, their views. And I mean, is that a fair way? Would you describe it?
Yeah.
So the first stage of like I'm just going to give an example of one particular, I'm sure there are many like religious identity developmental models, but the first stage is concrete, which is marked by a sense of religious devoutness by practicing religion, rigid and uncompromising behavior, a defensive self-righteous attitude, and perceptions of religion, which are dependent on the views of authorities and significant others. That's the first stage. The second one is relational, where individuals have a growing tendency to do what is logical, but maybe are limited to what is sensible to others. Confusion, where maybe it's distinguished by anxious thinking about religion due to feelings of anger, frustration associated with a sense of betrayal by significant others, or to the realization that they allowed others to define their religion. And then the next stage, I mean, I don't need to read all of the stages, but I'll say like the last stage is acceptance, which is individuals in acceptance status are comfortable with their religion, do not feel a need to invest psychological energy in defense mechanisms, and sincerely accept and appreciate other religions. And I think if you sort of view some of the behaviors and these conversations within that the framework of this religious identity model, you can see like maybe Jen is in that concrete stage where I feel like I have to be, you have like this sort of rigidity, and rather than maybe sort of like what we've talked about, even with the other substances, taking a step back and looking and saying like, well, what do I believe that is congruent with my faith and the religious base, and but what are also my personal beliefs, and how do I sort of want to integrate the two? And there can be this sort of comfort in not feeling like you have to shout it from the rooftops and become overly critical of other people that maybe aren't doing that. I mean, do you agree with that? Like that feels...
Yes, although I will bet you that Jen thinks she's in stage 2 or 3, or maybe is in stage 2 or 3. And I was just thinking about how like those descriptors that you read, they don't adhere to one religion, right? Because like part of me would almost want to be like, oh, Mormons are very in this camp, but every type of person exists in every type of way. I think that by comparison, there are ones that are way past where Jen would be if she were a 2 or 3. I think the fact that she's, like the stripper for her husband, the fact that she is the breadwinner, some of the things that she talks about where she's like, at least like challenging. She has this conversation with Jess, I think, in one of these episodes where it's following the baby blessing. So it's episode 4 where they're making up, they're talking, and Jess is like, I think it's more Zach who's thinking that. But they talk about how her husband has this idea that his medical career takes priority no matter what over them because he'll be provide. She gives all these reasons why that might be reasonable and true, but just kind of saying, we grow up in this like traditional home where he's expected to be the breadwinner, and the fact that she makes money at all would be seen as a less important hobby, no matter the amount of money. And so I think that I could see her starting to grapple with that. Like, okay, there's this, but there's this, and I'm in this state of confusion about some of those things. But still, and to you, and I agree, I think very rigid to that point where maybe like those professions of it are important to like, I don't know, assert her identity as LDS. I wouldn't know exactly what the reason is that she's talking about it so much.
Yeah, I just think if like doth protest too much, like if you have to keep talking about like this is how you should live your life, like I don't know. I tend to think like there's something often going on for someone there.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, like, this person is living their life in a way that I don't agree with. I kind of want to distance myself. But that's the problem. Like, you're not, these are your friends. And so
Mm,
if I just think like at some point growth involves acceptance that other people are going to live their lives in a different way. And I'm not saying Jen is not doing that, but I'm just speaking in general to people who maybe are more like judgmental of other people, not adhering to a certain like belief system.
totally. Yeah. Like it feel like when I hang out personally with people who really feel like astrology is something that influences or reflects their life, I feel like it's important that they know that I don't think that, and I don't mind them thinking that. But every once in a while, it feels very heavy-handed. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know what her motivation is. I also think there's ways in which people experience like an identity minority status that this can show up. And while they're in Utah, I'm not really sure how much that would apply, but I think of like members of the queer community who talk about going to like the gayborhood and we're going to go to the boys town and like whatever. And there's like so much infused into their sort of like speech and jokes or whatever about it that it's very prominent. Or people who live in New York can't stop like mentioning that they're in New York and that they live in New York in every conversation. So there are ways I think in which it's a strong part of your identity gets infused in. And I'm not sure if there's a motivation to like bring it up that's judgmental or not.
Mhm.
But it is interesting because even if her intention is not to do that, understanding that like you're in a group of people, everybody knows what's going on, everybody knows what garments are, but some of you are wearing them and some of you aren't. And you take a moment to be like, my garments, like you should know that's just going to be landing on different ears in different ways and whatever. So when Demi says, "Oh, the garment queen," I think that's in line with probably Jen being too Mormon because she's probably bringing it up so much that everybody's like, "We're hearing a lot of it from you."
Do we want to talk about I know we're kind of going all over the episodes. We're covering like bouncing back and forth, but the baby blessing?
I mean, well, so I'll just say what the baby blessing is. For those who may not know, is that what you're thinking?
Well, so she uses so as someone who is unfamiliar with the faith, uh it appeared to be an opportunity to like pray over the baby.
Hmm.
It's not a baptism, but there is some part of it, like it seemed like a religious part where this is um symbolic and spiritual, where you are offering up prayers for whatever for your baby.
Yeah.
But Jen at some point uses someone used the term baby shower. When I rewatched it, I was like, oh, baby shower? I was like, well,
Hmm.
the baby's born. But also like the Southern culture would call something like that a sip and see, maybe without the prayer part. You come
That's
home,
cute.
baby's born, you have like beverages and food, and you get to see the baby, and
You
you
see the baby.
see the baby, gotta see the baby. Uh, so, but yeah, so that was my impression.
Well, so it is interesting. I mean, I think if I were to like somehow rank LDS ceremonial type things, um, there would be a rank of like importance, a rank of covenant, like when you baptize, you're covenanting. When you go to the temple, there's a covenant. When it's a baby blessing, it's a baby, so it's a hope or a wish, I think, in a way, right? You're blessing the baby. It is supposed to be blessed by like a priesthood holder, so there is something in there, but it is ultimately kind of a prayer. What I found, I don't find Jen this way often, but she said one off-putting thing, which was like, in the Mormon church, when we do it, we don't just like sprinkle some water and hallelujah. It's a very sacred thing. And I was like, okay, I'm sure that sprinkling of water is sacred for those who do that as well. Like, there's this dismissive way of like, your rituals are very silly. Mine are very important and serious and should be revered. But ultimately, it often happens in church. So having it at home is like a thing that's more common now, I think, because it's probably like we also want the sip and see. But
Mhm.
ultimately, you say a prayer over the baby. Often it's kind of recorded. There's a lot of like wishes and, like you're going to grow up one day and marry somebody in the temple and it's going to be great. Like that's a common sort of like blessing as part of it or whatever. The fact that they weren't invited, I could see because not only is it a family, I mean, you came to a different event and you brought a flask you don't get to come to this one. Like, I think it's a reasonable consequence. I think Jen did a very poor job of informing people she had already invited to let them know they weren't coming.
That was the problem. She had
That was the problem.
and then 3 days before. But also, some of the people that she also disinvited weren't drinking at the party. I didn't understand that. I felt like that was not explained. Jesse, I get, yeah, you brought a flask. That didn't feel, this isn't what we're wanting right now for our baby blessing. But the other two, I'm like, why aren't they invited?
I could see not wanting to invite a skeptical atheist to your religious thing, because what you want is people who are going to be like, oh, this is nice, rather than somebody who's going to be like, this is pointless or whatever. So like, I can see like deciding who you invite to things. I could also see inviting your skeptical atheist friend to something because you're like, I love you and I'm doing this in my life and I think you'll, love and respect me and like whatever. So ultimately, I think when she sort of says it was more about Zach, that may be true. I actually think it probably is true. I think Jen would be more open, and Zach has a harder time being open. He doesn't like the friends. He doesn't like the patriarchy being disturbed, I believe, might be part of it. I think that there's things that Zach is grappling with that makes it all very uncomfortable.
Yes, I agree. It felt a little. I mean, even she was like, Zach, can you explain better? Probably because like you're the one pushing this. That's sort of what I felt when I handed Zach the phone. I feel the dynamics of, I mean, many of these women share that they are the breadwinner. And I wonder if there's just some cognitive dissonance that exists among some of these women where like we are wanting to uphold these more traditional, like gendered roles. However, there are, I mean, if you are the female partner and the breadwinner, that is a little bit discrepant from what is considered like more traditional. And how do you rationalize that? And I think,
yeah. And I could never tell you what's going on in the homes of these Mormon people because, I can tell you like my mom was in charge in my house. But the overt message is the man has a priesthood. And while they'll say a lot, that doesn't matter in terms of who's in charge or whatever. But there's been explicitly sort of stated like, if there's a disagreement in the couple, ultimately you should defer to the man because he's the priesthood holder. So like that has been said. So that's not repeated a lot. That's not like a thing that people are like going around saying, but it has been said. And so I know very few people who would ever try to like somehow play that card, but it has been said. And so I think it's there in the culture.
Like research shows that in heterosexual couples with kids, the division of responsibilities tends to be more so on the woman versus same-sex relationships, where it tends to be more equitable.
Yeah, I've read that.
I think I have thought this, and I know we could probably like go on a complete tangent on this. There's a whole movement like within the Republican
trad wife.
Yes. Yeah. And I've had these theories, which again, there could be research out there that I've not read, I'm not aware of, but I have these theories that like to deal with that cognitive dissonance of like, how is it that I am working full time and I am, as a woman, doing all of these things and it just does not seem fair. I have said this to myself in my marriage where I get why there are some women who, if they're able to, choose to be a stay-at-home mom, because then you could at least say, your role is to provide and my role is to take care of the kids and do everything else household wise. But like, it's really hard to identify, why is it that I am still doing everything and working full time and you are not? I don't understand why is that still the division of responsibility? And then on top of that, you're the breadwinner. So I am the one bringing home all of the money that affords this lifestyle. I'm the one cooking, cleaning, planning stuff for the kids. All of that, you just get to go to work and come home. I can't get behind that. And so I think like that does not help maintain a happy relationship when then you have this seething resentment, which I see a lot of times with like in these dynamics with like even some of my female patients. And I have a friend who she is a stay-at-home mom, and she will say almost like in defense of some of their stuff, well, this is how we have it arranged because she works part-time. So because my job, since he makes the money, this is my job. And almost like there's comfort there, and this is just how we sort of delineated our roles. But if you are the breadwinner and you are working full time and you are doing, and there's not more equitable like division, then you might not be super happy. And so I don't know. I've often wondered if that's a response to just try to address like potential like frustration, resentment, discontent that can arise as a result.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I think that like even in very well-meaning homes, those responsibilities that fall more often to women in a heterosexual marriage continue to happen. And you look at like a lot of reasons, but yeah, I could imagine that that's like a big thing going on in Jen and Zach's life. It's funny too, because they talk about having sort of like, I don't know if they say nannies or like they've got help that is hired in one of these cases that they talk about. But the question of like, oh, does Zach ever watch the kids by himself? And I think it was sort of like, no, he's so unfamiliar with that he like can't or is nervous. So that's super interesting. Because then when they take the baby to Dakota to do like a little trial, whatever,
yeah,
it's kind of great. I love it because Dakota's holding this baby in a way that like would concern me, and Jen's just like happy, and I'm like, good for her trusting him with your elastic baby, which is babies are very resilient. But yeah, just like kind of going through that whole thing, and then Zach's advice is like, you don't realize that she's going to be like so tired for a long time. Your wife is going to be so tired after the birth, and everybody's like, girlfriend, except for Dakota, who's like, yeah, my wife.
yeah.
Talking about Taylor. He's like warning her, your wife's going to be so tired. I'm like, what is that? What is that? What is that warning exactly about, Zach?
I mean, it felt like intimacy, like to me, like
I wondered, right?
Like,
you're gonna have to
having fun in the bedroom because she's gonna be tired. So
get used to it. It's gonna be rough for you.
Be tired. You should be tired too, sir. Like you both should be tired because you have a baby. But yeah, no. I mean, I do think I am not trying to criticize like also like the more traditional like gendered roles if that's like an agreement for both parties. But it's when it no longer feels equitable. There is something about like, and I'm not saying that, yes, what you're describing, like the invisible load is the term that people use a lot of times to describe like I have to plan. Like I even think like with my kiddo, like I have to see, are you close to needing a new shoe size? Like maybe I like need to have that on hand. It's starting to get cold. Does your jacket fit you still? Like all of these like decisions that you're making, it's taxing. And but still, I do think that if two people can come up with an arrangement that feels generally equitable and both parties are consenting to that, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's when one person is like, I didn't agree to this. I did not agree to do all of this alone, that it feels problematic. So that's more of my comment. So I'm not trying to criticize any other. Just had to also say that.
So I think that's it.
I think the next episode, the ladies go to Vegas, which honestly,
now I'm excited.
Quite excited about these next few episodes. I feel like these three that we covered are fine, but I'm really looking forward to talking about the others.